The races in Tolkien's universe are fairly well known. The main three are men, elves, and dwarves. Hobbits are a subset of men. Orcs, wargs, trolls, and dragons are the main bad guys. And then there's side races like the Ents and the Eagles, and of course, there's the Ainur. But there is one race that is shrouded in mystery and has been the source of debate amongst fans for literal decades. Giants. Yes, giants. So what's the deal with them, and what makes them one of Middle-earth's greatest mysteries? So giants appear as one of Middle-earth's races in The Hobbit, where they are mentioned several times and even witnessed on one occasion. That occasion is when Thorin's company are traversing the Misty Mountains during a terrible storm. Beings known as stone giants are witnessed hurling giant boulders at each other or at the ground, apparently laughing and shouting as they go. They are also mentioned by Gandalf afterwards, who says that he might need to find a half-decent giant to block off the front porch to Goblin Town, and it's also mentioned that the giants were the ones who drove the Proto-Beornings from the Misty Mountains. This has led to giants appearing in several adaptations of Tolkien's work. In games such as Battle for Middle-earth and The War in the North, giants appear as monstrous or semi-monstrous creatures that are aligned with the forces of evil. In Peter Jackson's Hobbit films, they appear as enormous elemental creatures that are literally made of stone, possibly being part of the mountains themselves. In Lord of the Rings Online and the Middle-earth collectible card game, they appear as extremely large men, cold, elusive, and found in remote places. But there's a problem here. Despite their mentions and appearance in The Hobbit, giants do not appear in any other of Tolkien's more modern works, except when mentioned in a purely metaphorical sense. They don't appear in The Lord of the Rings, they don't appear in The Silmarillion or The Unfinished Tales, or really anywhere that isn't an old draft. At the very least, it's a little odd to extensively mention something in one story, and even have them make a physical appearance, and then not mention them anywhere ever again. Especially in a world where the author tried to make the origins of every race as clear as possible. So what's the deal? Are giants even canon? So generally, The Hobbit, along with The Lord of the Rings, is considered to be the most canon of Tolkien's works, as they were the only works he published in his lifetime, the only works that he truly finished. However, there's no denying that The Hobbit is sort of an outlier, especially compared to the rest of the Legendarium. It was written as a children's book, and it was written as a standalone at the time. It had nothing to do with the drafts of the First Age that Tolkien had already completed. The Lord of the Rings came afterwards, and only then did Tolkien begin to combine all of his works into a greater legendarium. As a result, there's some elements of The Hobbit that sort of seem out of place when placed in the context of the entire legendarium. For example, when Bilbo was caught by trolls, he was revealed by a talking bag. Yes, one of the trolls had a seemingly sentient bag that gave Bilbo away. Are we supposed to now consider talking bags as canon? Well, you can if you want, but it's fairly easy to explain away. Bilbo wrote The Hobbit, and him inserting the talking bag is giving him an excuse for getting caught by the trolls, rather than admitting that he may have bungled it up. This is easy because talking bags don't exist anywhere else in the narrative. But it's a little bit more difficult with giants. While we might be able to consider Bilbo an unreliable narrator in some aspects, it's a bit different when it starts involving other characters. Bilbo might have been exaggerating the encounter with the stone giants, but he's not the only character to witness or mention them. Thorin also has dialogue that brings up the giants, and Gandalf does as well. So how can you explain it away? You can't really claim that Bilbo made up dialogue for other characters, because that would begin a massive slippery slope where you could start using that excuse all of the time. You could propose that the giants were actually just mountain trolls, because Bilbo might not know the difference between them and the previously encountered cave trolls, but Gandalf and Thorin definitely would. You can't really say that the giants were just metaphors for the storm, because they are repeatedly personified by several characters. Honestly, there isn't really a good way to explain them away. So if you consider The Hobbit an important part of Tolkien's canon, then we probably have to consider giants as canon as well. So why don't they appear anywhere else? In-universe, you could use the explanation that giants were so rare and so elusive that they played an incredibly minimal role in the events of Middle-earth, so much so that they weren't even worth mentioning. They might not have ever aligned with good or evil, and instead steered completely clear of all the major conflicts in Middle-earth. They might have also only been found in a few remote places such as high up in the Misty Mountains, meaning only the most well-travelled or well-learned people had heard of them or seen them. Out of universe, the answer is a lot clearer. Giants appeared in a lot of Tolkien's earlier drafts. Originally, they were servants of Melkor. In another script, they were divided between the wood giants and the mountain giants. it becomes increasingly clear in other scripts that giants were a precursor to the Ents. One giant named Nan actually resembles an elm tree. And interestingly enough, Treebeard was originally a giant, and it was him, not Saruman, that held Gandalf captive in Isengard. When The Hobbit was written, Tolkien had not yet invented Ents, so it's possible that the giants encountered in the Misty Mountains were mountain giants, whereas creatures like Treebeard were wood giants. Over time, it appears giants became known as tree giants, and the tree giants would eventually become Ents. But what were giants supposed to be? What were the giants in The Hobbit? There is a small passage in one of Tolkien's drafts that gives us an idea. It's a draft for The Shadow of the Past, the second chapter of The Fellowship of the Ring, probably written as early as 1938. In this draft, you can see clear links between The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Orcs are still called goblins, and Sauron is still called the Necromancer. Giants are mentioned and are referred to as big folk, but far bigger and stronger than men, no stupider, and often full of cunning and wizardry. Given this chapter is a direct continuation of The Hobbit, it seems that, at least at this point in time, Tolkien envisaged giants as men, but simply far larger. In other words, they're basically the opposite of hobbits. Alright, given everything we've said, where does this leave us? Well, Tolkien probably intended for giants to disappear from canon, given that he didn't write about them again after 1940. However, they were never removed from The Hobbit, and there's no easy way to explain their presence away, so it's kind of difficult to consider them as non-canon unless you just ignore certain parts of The Hobbit. As for what they were, some versions of Tolkien's giants undoubtedly became Ents, but the discontinued version that we see in The Hobbit were probably just very large men. What we can be sure about, the giants were an echo of a much older version of the Legendarium that simply stuck around. And while they might be a little bit hard to explain, they don't exactly change much or cause any other problems with the world building. A quirk, if you will. A quirk so unimportant that I'll probably never talk about them again. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. I was originally planning on doing a video involving all of Tolkien's abandoned creatures such as ogres, wereworms, and sea serpents, but giants deserve their own video simply because they appeared far more often in Tolkien's earlier works than any of the other things I just mentioned, which sometimes they only got mentioned once and never again. Whether you want to consider them as canon or not is up to you, I guess. Most adaptions consider them canon in at least some form, so why not? Cheers, farewell, and remember, giants may be tall, but are ultimately unimportant. Height doesn't matter. Except on Tinder.